Today's topic is the power of social impact, how impact metrics drive increased volunteer engagement and additional revenue. And so for those of you that may not know me, my name is Gung Wang. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Civic Champs. My background, was in corporate. I did some consulting in the past, had some other tech startups, but I was really called to create something that had a bit more social impact, as everyone else here what can probably relate to, right? And so Civic Champs, real quickly, right? We're a volunteer management software platform. And today, though, more exciting is we have an awesome guest, Sherry Jones, who is the president and founder of Sure Impact. And so Sherry comes from, Sherry and I got to meet, I think 2 years ago, when we got together. We have a shared investor colleague, and so got to connect with her there. But let me see here. Oh, yep. We oh no, my screen is going a wire. Tech is killing me here. All right, let me stop my share here. So Sherry, for more than 20 years, Sherry has worked alongside foundations, nonprofits, and government leaders to help them use data to solve complex social problems and increase revenue. She's an author, professor, and internationally recognized measurement expert. Sherry believes in data, metrics, and accountability. So welcome to the webinar, Sherry.
Thanks, Gung. Is that my cue to take it away, or did you have more?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
All right, wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. It's so great to see some familiar names on this list, as well as some new friends that we get to meet today. And if you've not been to one of my webinars before, you will soon discover how much passion and energy I have related to the topic of measurement and impact measurement, particularly. And so you're gonna drink the Kool-Aid with me for the next 45 minutes or so. So get ready. I share a lot of great content. I'm a former professor, so I can never deliver any sort of webinar without giving extreme value away to those who participated. So please get your notebooks out, get your pages out, so you'll be able to write down some notes to take some action today. Very actionable insights. So thanks for all of you who talked about what impact measurement means to you, what word, phrase, or metaphor you hear. One thing we often hear when I'm talking to nonprofit leaders is that they know they need data to tell their story. They know that impact measurement is important, but let's be honest, they got involved with the work that they do because they want to create an impact in the world. They want to serve the clients. Many of you are probably involved in volunteering initiatives and volunteering programs. And so you want to engage as many volunteers as possible to help your organization expand its mission, which is all wonderful. But what I'm here to talk about today is how data is necessary for your nonprofits in today's world to engage more volunteers, to tell your story, to raise more money. You need that data to tell powerful stories in this day and age more than ever. First and foremost, because stories are great. I'm not saying that we don't want to tell our stories too, but as human beings, we care about something, we make decisions based on our emotions, which comes from stories, but we rationalize those decisions with our brains. So as we walk through this webinar today, we'll give you some tips and tricks to be able to incorporate data into your storytelling to better engage your volunteers, to increase their engagement with your organization. Now, I do have one bad news story today, but that's all I have to say today in terms of bad news, is that when we're talking about creating an impact-centric organization, an organization that has the data they need to tell their story of impact, success doesn't happen in a silo. And so unlike some maybe departments in a nonprofit, like your fundraising department, for example, maybe one person can write all the copy, write all the pitches, go out into the world and tell a story and meet with donors. But when we're talking about impact measurement and collecting the right data to tell your stories to engage more volunteers, it does take a team effort. You will need to get your team involved, understanding why data is important, what data they should be collecting, and how they should be collecting it in the most efficient and effective way. So that is my only bad news today. So knowing that it's not a siloed event, and then we do need to get our whole staff involved, the executive team, our programmatic team, our fundraising team, our volunteer management team, our grants writing team, every person that's essential to the operations of your nonprofit. How do we get them involved? Well, the first is we need to start in the end in mind. Again, having data related to your impact measurement story is essential to your success, but it's a means to an end. And so research that we've done over the years demonstrates that nonprofits who have outcomes and impact data and marry that with their story and use it to make decisions and talk to volunteers, they are more likely to increase fundraising. They have greater success, actually 63% more likely to increase fundraising year over year than those who do not have impact measurement. It also allows you to improve the outcomes. If you don't know what you're doing, how do you know if you're hitting your mission? So you need that key data in order to get better, to scale your impact, as well as have a stronger impact story, which is essentially why you raise more money, and engage volunteers and volunteer engagement because of the impact data that you're able to share. Come on. There we go. So let's go back to the basics. When we're talking about impact, that word is used. It's a little bit overused, I think, these days. So let's level set and talk about what are we talking about when we're talking about impact. So what my definition of impact is that you have some quantitative metric to prove that you are achieving lasting social change. That whatever your mission statements are, that you have some data that demonstrates that your organization is moving the needle on the things that are important to your organization. So impact must be demonstrated. It's one thing to talk about your theory of change, to talk about theoretically what would happen if your organization was successful. But when I'm talking about impact, I'm talking about demonstrating those changes. How are you changing lives and changing circumstances? Therefore, in order to communicate your impact, you must have data to tell that story. So we talked a little bit about this, but why this is so important to your nonprofit, why it should be something that you're talking about in your organization and you're investing in and committing, collecting this data and using this data to tell your story. Well, first, it allows you to best serve your cause. Again, your nonprofit exists not just to fundraise, unless that's 100% your mission, but for the majority of nonprofits, they have, especially those with volunteers, it's a little more beyond just raising money. You're raising money in order to achieve some sort of outcome. You're recruiting volunteers, so those volunteers can help your organization deliver on its mission to achieve changes in lives and changes in circumstances within those that you provide. It also, again, is a powerful tool for fundraising, and it gives your team members and especially your volunteers a sense of satisfaction of what you do. And I'd love to toss this over to Gung for a minute because I know he is the volunteer expert, and I'd love to hear what you've been seeing related to organizations who are using impact metrics, impact data in their stories to help with volunteer engagement and recruitment.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, I think to your point, right? Like I think telling our stories is gets so much more impactful when you include the metrics. And so one of the things that we've seen to work really well, right, especially when it comes to volunteers, is kind of this let's call it a three-part formula, right? So where you first acknowledge the gift of time that your volunteer has given. So I'm talking about sort of that thank you note that you might want to send. But you tie it to the impact or metric of what they did for the day. So as an example of that, right? So if you're looking at a fundraiser, let's call it a baseball game, right? That you're doing a fundraiser, you could say, hey, thank you so much for your 8 hours of support today. As you know, this helped us raise X amount of dollars, right? Or maybe if you're out there, you're doing trail cleanups, right? We have a lot of conservation groups, right? Like you could talk about how many, miles were covered in the day, how many pounds of garbage were collected, right? All of that started to contextualize, what their impact was, right? And that thank you. And then you can also then shift it to say, hey, but there's more work to be done, right? And then there's, here, if you're going to make it a little bit of an ask, right? And that can also be very powerful if you have some impact metrics around sort of the organization that you're, as an organization, what you've been able to do, right? But always, I think it's really important to try to make that connection back to the volunteer so that they feel like they're really a part of that story. So hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's what we've seen too, but I like some validation. So if we want to engage our volunteers, because remember, your volunteers are coming to your nonprofit because they want to make a difference. So a word I love to say, or expression I love to say, is this concept of whether it's a volunteer or a donor, and oftentimes our volunteers are also our biggest donors, is this concept of portals of purpose. So they are engaging with your nonprofit because they might not have the time or expertise to full-time work in your nonprofit. However, they want you to be successful. They believe in your mission. And so through you, that is their portals of purpose. That gives them meaning and purpose in their lives. And so, and I've interviewed a lot of donors and volunteers and why they've engaged and given their time, treasures, and talents to nonprofits. And what we hear is when we see when volunteers can repeat the impact story with numbers, their face lights up. They get more excited. They're more evangelists for your cause and your mission. So what types of data do you need in order to talk about your impact? So we need 3 types of data within your nonprofit. So first, you need outputs, which most nonprofits are very good at collecting this, but this is what was done. So who did you serve? What services did you provide? Those are your outputs. That's what you did. Then you also need some metrics of quality, how well it was done, especially if you are working with children or people, because we can't engage the community if the community does not believe that we're here to serve them. A story was a community had built this amazing federally qualified health care center in a neighborhood that did not have access to high quality primary care. And this particular center was beautiful, high, like state of the art, brand new, probably better than any medical center that I access. And they put it in the neighborhood and the people were not coming to the health center. And so after doing some research about why was this, the neighborhood did not believe that the health center was for them for a variety of reasons. So when we think about culturally responsive care or timeliness or meeting the residents where they are, this quality metric was off. So they couldn't get to outcomes because if you don't have people coming through your doors because of your quality, you can't get to the outcomes you want. And then the third type of data you need is a metric of how participants are better off. So in a nutshell, think about your nonprofit and are you able to tell your story? What did you do? How well did you do it? And how people are better off with data that you're collecting regularly across your organization. So I know a lot of nonprofits, especially if you're new to this impact measurement space, get hung up on grant language that often talks about outputs and outcomes. So I'm going to give us a very nonprofit example to help us identify the difference between what we need to be collecting within our nonprofits. So the first is our inputs. So these are the ingredients, the things that make our nonprofit unique. It could be some curriculum you use, a facility that you have, your staff, your volunteers, your website, technology. So what is it that you use on a day-to-day basis that makes your nonprofit special and uniquely positioned to be successful at delivering on your mission? Now, activities, that is what you do with those inputs. So in our example here, creating a hamburger, those would be putting all of those ingredients together. For you, your activities might be counseling, mentoring, volunteering would be pseudo input output. It could be that you're delivering coaching, case management, training services, right? So that's what you do. And the outputs is just a count of those activities. So outputs in and of itself do not equal impact. And this is very, very important. Outputs do not equal impact, because just because you make 10 hamburgers does not let me know were those 10 hamburgers cooked all the way, or did you make 10 hamburgers with raw meat patties? Now that's a weird example, but my point is that too often the nonprofit sector, when we're talking about our impact, really all we're talking about is our outputs, and outputs is just what we did. It does not mean that we changed anyone's life or we made anyone's situation better. Instead, we need to go one step further and be able to measure and communicate our outcomes. And so in our hamburger example, our outcomes are the number of people who are now happy or full or nourished, right? So we need to make sure that we have both measures of outputs and measures of outcomes. And I'll talk about how do we move towards an output-centric culture, so we can talk about how our organizations are changing lives and changing circumstances with the end result of engaging more volunteers. So in order to get started, we need to ask the right questions. So now that we know that we can't just talk about the number of people we serve as a metric of outcomes and the impact that we made, we have to ask ourselves questions and start to assign data to it. So the first question is, what is the connection between the service you provide and the outcomes you produce? So can you communicate with data that shows that when people receive X, Y, or Z services within my nonprofit, if they receive our mentoring services coupled with some external referrals, are they more likely to increase their academic success or have increased social emotional learning? You also want to be able to communicate with data. How is your work contributing to positive changes in the community? Are you increasing graduation rates? Are you decreasing violent crime within your community for those that you serve? And for you, and each nonprofit is unique. Some days I wish I was, selling a financial metric service, because we do have general standardized accounting practices that I could put a slide on a screen and say, here are the metrics. This is what you should be looking at to determine your success. But in the nonprofit space, each nonprofit success is going to look slightly different. So we'll be giving you some information to help you guide through how do you define success and attach metrics to that for your nonprofit. All right, so this is my favorite tool. This is the first tool. You can go back and use this in your office this afternoon. This is the 5 whys exercise. This is the very, very first step in identifying what are those outcomes that you should be measuring if you don't already have any in place. So you're going to ask yourself and your team 3 questions 5 times. So the first is, why do you do what you do? And when I say you do what you do, I mean your organization. So why does your organization engage in the work that it does? And you'll ask yourself that 5 times. So let's say you're providing mentoring services. So why do you do that? Well, I do that so that kids have access to a trusted adult. Great. Why is it important that kids have access to a trusted adult? Well, we know that when kids have access to a trusted adult, they increase their resiliency. Why is it important that we increase students' resiliency? Well, when children have increased resiliency, it's an anecdote to adverse childhood experiences. Great. And why is it important that we have an anecdote to adverse childhood experiences? Well, because then those children will leave higher quality of lives in their future. That's just a really quick example. Then you're going to ask the same question, why do your funders and partners want to partner with you? And so this might be slightly different, especially if your partners are government funders or large foundation funders. They may be looking for some sort of social return on investment. They may be looking at taxpayer savings. They may be looking at reduction in higher level costly services. So make sure you understand their whys, because you'll need to have those impacts and outcomes in your story as well. And then the third thing is to ask yourself, why do your participants and clients want to participate? And this can also be, why do your volunteers want to participate with your organization? What do they hope to accomplish? And again, they might be different as well. For example, if you're working with students, I bet very few students are signing up for a mentoring program because they're like, you know what, I would love for you to increase my social emotional learning. But they may want a fun and engaging environment and a cool adult to hang out with. That might be attractive to them. But it's important that we have metrics that show we're meeting the needs of those that we serve as well. And then when we understand these whys for all of our participants, then we want to throw that into our organization's logic model, which hopefully you've all had some experience with. But again, it's one piece of paper that just talks about, again, what are your inputs? What are your outputs? Who do you serve? And what are those short and medium term outcomes, which are those whys that we talked about, right? So maybe it is increased social emotional learning. Maybe it is reduction in absenteeism in school, or better cleanliness in the environment, or more economic opportunity. So again, each nonprofit's whys are going to be different. Therefore, your outcomes are going to be different as well. So once you've identified what those outcomes are, you will need a way to track how you're moving the needle over time for those that you serve. And you need to analyze that data in a way to show how are your communities and people better off because of the work that you do. And this is just an example of a screenshot from Sure Impacts Analytics that shows how we easily help nonprofits track what they do, how well they do it, and how people are better off, and take those analytics. So you have that information right there at your fingertips to tell that powerful story and help you engage your volunteers and raise more money. So once you have this data, then we can start to communicate it to engage our volunteers. And so what are some of the things we need to consider when we're wanting to communicate our impact to tell a powerful story that will help us engage our volunteers? Well, first, we want to use that data to share some unexpected outcomes. So maybe you have found, let's say you run a food bank, and that you found that 60% of the families that you serve actually do make a living wage. That might be unexpected. Like, wow, I didn't know that. So you're going to take some of the data that you have collected and use it to tell a compelling story or to get people's attention. We also, when we're communicating our impact, we want to present our facts in a concrete way. So that's why it's really important to be able to say, 86% of families were able to increase their income stability by participating in our organization. Or 95% of the students we served saw at least one reading level improvement on a validated reading assessment. You want those facts to be very concrete so that our audience can remember them. So they can get really excited about that one impact metric. So when they're volunteering, they're like, this is why I'm doing this, because by volunteering, I'm helping one student, one family get to better social emotional learning, better income stability, better health outcomes, whatever it is that your nonprofit achieves. But giving them that concrete fact that they can recite to their friends and their family and be proud about in the community makes all the difference. Also, when you're using data and you have a systematic way to track and collect this information, it increases your nonprofit's credibility. It increases their trust in you, because it's not just a great fundraiser or a masterful storyteller. They actually have data to back it up. And so they can feel really good. They're, again, remember, we're rationalizing our decisions with our brain. They can feel really good about being involved in this trustworthy, credible, impactful organization. Now, we've got our data. Here's our story side. So of course, though, when we have these facts, let's say it's 89% of families increase their income stability. We do want that story. We want the story of how the family was transformed by, engaging with maybe our volunteer coaches or engaging with our services. And we want that story about one family because it will help us remember the emotion and it inspires us to act. So when we compare or mix those stories with our data, that's when we amplify our impact and our engagement. And it allows us then to celebrate our success with our volunteers, with our employees, with our board, with our funders. And it gives us powerful information to keep people motivated to keep moving forward. So to summarize, what we need to create a strong impact statement is we need to talk about the number of clients served, who they are, what makes them unique, what are their demographics, what regions are we supporting them, what did we do with them, and metrics of quality and outcomes. So when we have those pieces of data, we have the ingredients for a powerful impact story. So I'm asking you to think about and reflect, what is your impact story? How are people better off because of the services and programs you provide? Do you have a clearly defined outcome, first and foremost? And can you calculate your success rate? So your success rate is the number of people who successfully achieve those outcomes. It's pretty basic. Once you have a clearly defined outcome and you're using it and you're tracking it over time, it's a very easy calculation. It's the number of people you served on the bottom, the number of people who successfully achieved an outcome on the top. That would give you your success rate. And the last thing you need to understand to tell a very powerful impact story is how much your program costs. So this will get us to a metric of cost per success. And we're going to talk about how to marry our volunteer data with our cost per success data to really engage our volunteers. But so cost per success, how much your program costs when you divide it by the number of successful people. What now you're telling is how much it costs to get one person to a successful outcome. And this is so critical because remember when I talked about hamburgers before? If we just take how much it costs to run our program divided by the number of people served, then we don't know if putting people through those services are good or bad. But if we divide it by the number of people who are successful, now we're saying this is how much it costs to get to a successful outcome. And I get that you may have some unsuccessful people, but that's okay because we're dealing with people. And as your success rate rises, your cost per success decreases. And don't worry, I have a resource for you later that Gung will tell us about where I've written all this down, all these formulas down for you. So we don't have to take all our notes right now. But here's some examples. If you're just thinking about what are those impact statements, I've given some of us through the narratives, but you can see how they're translating. Typically, a success rate will be the percentage of people who have experience, whether it's treatment outcomes or reduced barriers to accessing services or been able to increase or maintain safe and affordable housing, right? It's really how are you changing lives and circumstances of people, and what is the success rate of you being able to do that? So let's talk about a practical example of how through committing to measuring success, using Sure Impact, calculating their cost per success has transformed a nonprofit. So Center of Hope is a youth serving organization in Toledo, Ohio, and they do use Sure Impact to track what they do, who they're serving, how people are better off, the success rate, and have all those analytics at their fingertips. But they committed to start tracking this, and they learned they have after-school programming, they have some adult reentry programs, they have some programs that are designed to help people reclaim child support that they need. So they have a variety of programs, but when we averaged across all their different programs and outcomes, essentially 63% of their participants were successful achieving their outcomes. But and we can debate is 63% good or bad, but that's what they knew their success rate was. And so they have a place now to start and try to improve. But they also were able to calculate their cost per success. So they took that percentage of successful people, and then they divided that by how much it costs to run their organization. And it came out with, it was $2,373 to get one family to successful outcome. Now, as they went out into the community and started to fundraise and started to talk about to the volunteers and the people they wanted to engage to participate and be involved in their organization, a few things happened. One, just by having this data, they started to be able to increase their revenues by 50% year over year over year. But also, they were educating their funders and their volunteers to turn around and ask the other nonprofits that they were working with, what's your cost per success? What is your program success rate? And a lot of nonprofits couldn't even tell them that. So there again, it increased the trust in their organization because they were committed to monitoring and measuring how well people were better off because of the work that they do. They also were able to use publicly available research to look at what was the savings that they were creating in the community because of their success. And that equaled $16,000. So when they got one family to success, it was basically saving the community $16,000. So what they could tell their funders, they could tell their volunteers, is that for every $2,300 donated to our nonprofit, we're saving the community $16,000 in future like taxpayer costs and other costs, which is a 594% social return on investment. And when they just looked at their food program, that was a 975% social return on the investment of the community. So it was this data that allowed them to expand. They've now just recently built a brand new facility. It's a beautiful place for kids to go. They've expanded in multiple different languages. And all of this expansion and all of this data collection is made easy because they've chosen to implement an impact measurement software that helps them do this. Now let's talk about how we take this story and we take this data to help you engage your volunteers. Because now, if you're telling this story and you're showing volunteers that because of your work, we're able to get 63% of families successful, we're saving the community, $16,000 in community costs. But you also, that cost per success, so we talked about for every $2,300 donated, but you can calculate how much volunteer hours that your organization uses and put a dollar amount to that. So if you were going to have to pay someone $20 or $25 to do that work, if not volunteered, you could translate number of volunteer hours cost per success as well. So you can kind of substitute and play with that formula to help volunteers see how their hours are actually also helping attribute to the organization's cost per success and saving the organization significant amount of money. So once we've committed to creating an impact-centric culture and have data to tell our stories, we want to demonstrate this to our volunteer. We want to share this information with our volunteers because they want something in return too, right? It's their social return on investment. They're choosing to spend time with your organization over other places they could be spending their time, or maybe away from work or away from the family. So when you can communicate this, it's their personal social return on investment because they're giving of their time, and that is the social return on investment that they need. It also helps them better understand the purpose of their contribution and how your organization is making people better off, which again, we've seen this transform volunteers to not just being volunteers, but being advocates for your cause, telling their friends, recruiting more volunteers, helping getting their workplaces involved to donate, becoming board members, becoming donors. And in the next generation of workforce and volunteers, they will not understand when an organization doesn't have impact data because they've grown up in a world where they know what their impact is when they put out something on Instagram or X or Snapchat. So in a world where they constantly are getting information fed back to them about their impact, they will not understand if a nonprofit doesn't know the impact they're creating quantitatively. And so again, it will help you recruit the next generation of donors and volunteers. So that I'm going to pause there. I know Gung has more things to talk about. We will have some time for Q&A because I know everyone's kind of in a different place in their impact measurement journey. But let's pause there and Gung, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Well, there was one question that came through from Helen Hong. She said, do you recommend working through these questions with staff or the board or both together? I'm guessing, sort of the questions that you talked about earlier.
Yeah. So I actually think it's a great exercise, the 5 whys exercise, to do it with your board and with your staff. At least make sure that everyone who represents some level of part of the organization is involved, because what you'll find is that you will get woefully different answers, because sometimes, the board might be wearing a corporate lens or a funder lens, and someone who's, a direct service provider has the real understanding of why participants engage with your organization.
Mm.
So the more people that you can have, even have clients participate if you can, but the more feedback you can get will really help you understand what is that value that your nonprofit provides in the community,
That's awesome.
or at least
And
perceived value.
I saw that Lou from Volunteer Match also asked a question around, the independent sector puts out this volunteer dollar value every year.
Mhm.
Is that something that you would recommend using as a way to measure impact?
Yeah, well, I think that volunteer value, it's a great thing to incorporate into that volunteer SORI story. Like, volunteering in and of itself does help your nonprofit save money, obviously, because there would be a value if you had to pay someone to do it. But again, volunteer hours are, and I understand we're talking about the importance of volunteers, and I'm not diminishing them at all, but they are inputs to your nonprofit's mission. So you use that volunteer hours and you put that into your return on investment calculation. You still though need to communicate how your nonprofit is changing lives and changing circumstances, and how volunteer hours drive that impact.
Yeah, that's great. That's an awesome, awesome answer.
Mhm.
As expected. And so yeah, so as Sherry mentioned, we'll walk through a few more things here together. And so one thing I wanted to do is just highlight a little bit of our perspective from Civic Champs, and think about how does this relate to maybe some of the work that we do. We also have a number of freebies that we'll be sharing, including Sherry alluded to a great resource that she's put together for everyone. So stay tuned for that. So the first thing is, on the Civic Champ side, so what you're looking at here on my screen is one of our surveys. And so you can have, you could have a Google form or anything like that. And so I think this is a great way to, building on what Sherry's talking about, how do you capture some of the information or impact metrics, right? And so this survey, right, obviously the questions are pretty generic, but you can imagine you're asking instead, how many pounds of garbage did you collect today? What's the impact, right? Or you could even ask for mentors or mentees, right? Like, did you have a good experience, right? Like, do you feel more motivated? Do you feel like you're progressing in your career? All sorts of questions that you can ask. And so for us, right, so one way you could obviously collect this is, you can, in that thank you email that I mentioned earlier, you can certainly, put a questionnaire in there as well and say, hey, thank you so much for your time. Would you mind answering some of these questions, right? And so that's one way I think about how to collect this information as well. And then of course, right, from our perspective, right, so this is, you're looking at the Civic Champs dashboard. And so you can see here, right, there's some of these sort of, let's call them input metrics, right? And so to Lou's point, right, this estimated impact of your time spent, right? Certainly you could talk about that with your volunteers as, hey, in addition to your the other impact metrics, just know that your time itself is very valuable, because we would have to have staff members that would have to be paid, and so you're saving us this amount of dollars, right? To Sherry's point, right, saving the dollars doesn't mean that you're having impact in the cause, and so those are still a little bit different, right?
Can I jump in, Gang?
Yeah.
About that, because I just great. So what you could do is, so let's say you've got that $513,000 of estimated impact. So again, if I would go back to that Center of Hope example where it was $23 cost per success, if you divided the 2,300 by this number, whatever that would be, it would probably be like 25,000 or something like that. But anyway, basically that's how many families your volunteer hours was able to contribute to your mission. So do you see how
Right.
those two can link?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and you can make that sort of direct tie with that impact. No, that's a
Yeah.
great point. That's a great point. And then so for us, right, so how do we collect some of this data? So we have a mobile app, right? So you can check in, you can track your hours this way, sort of easily select what you're doing. And then at the end, you could also leave quick feedback. And I think this is also really kind of an interesting way to collect, right, data points, right? So if you're in the reflections, you can ask people for things like, oh, in addition to how you feel, like maybe you know how many, again, pounds of garbage you collected today, right? Sort of thing. We also enable, sort of micro donations here as well. But yeah, and then so, from a dashboard standpoint, you could see, all of this rich data too. So hopefully that's helpful, right? In terms of, filtering, right? You can also filter, so making that reporting a little bit easier. I think it's also helpful, right? Because then you can identify specific groups of volunteers that maybe you want to send a more targeted message to, right? And so, yeah, so that's our perspective. This is contact information for myself and Sherry. I'm sure, Sherry agrees, but we'd love people to stay in touch with us. Please reach out on LinkedIn or otherwise. Again, we'll share out the slides, so no need to, madly write down all this information. And then, yeah, Sherry was very kind and providing kind of a nice freebie for us here. And so if you want to take a QR, you sort of a snapshot of that QR code, there is the ultimate guide to impact measurement that she's written. It's provided a step-by-step guide for folks. And so you can sort of read that and learn how to do impact measurement better. And then for us, we also have our ebook around volunteer management. And so if you combine the two, you'll be great at both, right? And then finally, for folks that show up for our webinars, we always provide a little bit of a discount if you were to sign up for Civic Champ. So this will be sort of expired on March 7th. And so if you want to book a demo, there's a link here to do so. With that, we'll jump back into Q&A and see if there's any folks that have additional questions. Let's see here. Julie mentioned our dashboard, volunteer hours, and monthly report to board of directors. That's great. And then, and Ross had a question. And so as I looked at SROI, it is the qualitative measures that seem hard to me. They can be fuzzy, more specifically, the impact that occurs on our volunteer staff, and on us, sorry, our volunteer staff, and how we are changed and better off. That seems so hard to measure, capture, and communicate. Any suggestions on this? How to show that Bill the volunteer is deeply and profoundly impacted by his work in our org, and that impact radiates out to his family, his work life, and there's social value to that. Yes, having a great volunteering program certainly is in of itself a provides value. Yeah, how do you think about that, Sherry? How would you capture that?
Yeah, and it sounds like Civic Champs is designed to help you more quantitatively measure something that is qualitative through the questionnaire feature that you have. And so what I would recommend doing, again, starting with that 5 whys exercise, and ask your volunteers, why do you volunteer with us? And get that feedbacks from some of your best volunteers when they tell you stories of how it, maybe lifts their mental well-being, or provides them that purpose in life because they have a job elsewhere that doesn't provide a lot of purpose, and your volunteerism does. And so, and then what you do is you take kind of that qualitative data and you turn it into a questionnaire with standardized rating scales. So you can then quantitatively capture what's more qualitative. And so by way of background, I'm an industrial and organizational psychologist by training. So quantifying the qualitative is my expertise. And I know a lot of people who that's new to, they often say, well, that's a survey. Absolutely, it's a survey. But if you structure your survey questions in a standardized way, you can use those surveys for a quantitative metric. And let me give you this example. Most government programs, most social sector programs are based on the US Census data. And what is a US Census? It is essentially a survey. So anyway, I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, and also very delayed.
Yes.
We have the 2000 and 2021 data right now, right? So
yeah.
Yeah, hopefully, Ross, that was helpful. And I agree, right? If there's ways Oh, and yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm still sharing the screen, so no need to see that giant Q&A question mark there. So, but yeah, any other questions? And Ross said that was helpful, so that's great. And let me, yeah, there, make ourselves a little bigger here. I guess one question I had, Sherry, just for you was just, if I were to think about, we nonprofits have so many things to do, right? It can be very overwhelming. And, what's if there's like the one, most likely lowest hanging fruit thing, that I can come back with and say, I'm gonna do this, and maybe that catalyzes my organization into doing more because it
Mhm.
shows like that quick, immediate impact.
Yeah.
Um, what would you recommend for folks?
Yeah, well, I think I sound like a broken record sometimes, but doing that for if you don't know what your outcome measures are, if prior to this, and this is normal, so it's okay if you're sitting there going, I was this many years old when I learned that number of people served does not equal impact. You're not alone. And so the next thing to do is say, okay, do that 5 whys exercise to help you understand really why do you do what you do? And then ask yourselves, do we have data to quantify how we're changing lives and changing circumstances
Right.
in a systematic way, and just commit to one? You don't have to boil the ocean. Just say, all right, what our most important thing is that we're helping people with food security. So that's all we're going to measure. It's for all the people we serve, pre and post. How are we improving food security? So just start small. Start small and then you'll expand from there.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think even just doing the exercise has its own value, right? Helping
Oh
you
yeah.
better think through your communications, how you articulate your organization and what you do. So that's great. And I see Rosa has a question about how can I access to the feedback form to incorporate it to my thank you emails. Yeah, that's a great question. So if you're a Civic Champs user, if you we can certainly help you with that. Otherwise, if you're not, then something simple like a Google form actually works. It's not as integrated, right? There's not as good for reporting purposes, but you can certainly do that. And then Erica's mentioned, do you also include the hours contributed by partners as well in covering the value of volunteer times? Um, I guess I'm not quite sure on the partners, but usually, I would say anyone that volunteers for your organization, even if they're from an outside organization, I probably include them, right? Because they're still, as long as if you can say they're driving forward the mission and the impact, right, of what you do, I would include them. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, great, everyone. Hopefully this was super helpful. I certainly thought I guess that was a Freudian slip. I thought that was great, Sherry. So thank you so much
Thank
for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.